Let's wrap up June. Hi, I'm Alex. This is Pucksandpaperbacks, where I love to shout about queer and trans books. Today, I'll be sharing my June reading wrap-up. If you're new here, or you are new to my wrap-ups, I do not share star ratings for books. I stopped doing that a couple years ago because it just doesn't work for me. I feel like my reviews are in-depth enough for you to know if I liked or disliked a book. With that out of the way, let's get into the video. In June, I read 9 books, which totals to 1,486 pages and 29.38 hours of audio. All 9 books had LGBTQIA+ rep. For format, I read 2 audiobooks, 2 ebooks, 3 physical books, and the last 2 books were a mixture between the audio and physical. I read 1 manga, 1 picture book, and the rest were novels. For genre, I read 3 romance, 2 contemporary, 1 fiction, 1 literary fiction, 1 sci-fi, and 1 nonfiction. For pub year, I'm going to have to look down at my iPad because there's just way too many publication years for me to remember off the top of my head. So, I read 2 2025 releases, a 2024 release, a 2023 release, 2 2022 releases, a 2020 release, a 2018, and a 2015 release. For reading challenges, I completed the title challenge for Buzzword this month, which was to read a book with memory words. I read Forget Me Not by Alison Derrick, and I did read something for Celestial, but I never finished it, so I am slotting in Lunar Boy for this since it has a moon on the cover. For Pop Sugar, I completed the prompt to read a book that was mentioned in another book. Last month when I read Disappoint Me, it mentioned Detransition Baby by Tori Peters, so I was able to complete that prompt this month. For a 2024 prompt that you didn't get to or want to try again, I have chosen a book that centers video games. I didn't get to that one last year, and I read Glitch Girl by Rainey Odit. I also completed Snake on the Cover with Freshwater by Kweke Emezi, and the last prompt I completed is a bonus to read a book that starts with Y. I read You Had Me at Happy Hour by Timothy Janofsky. For Read Queerly, I completed 2 prompts, Poetry or in Verse, and Black Author. For the Trans Reading Challenge, I completed a book with a non-binary character by reading Love and Other Disasters by Anita Kelly. There were multiple prompts to read a BIPOC trans author or BIPOC trans main character, and I completed all of those prompts, finishing it off with Freshwater by Kweke Emezi. And Detransition Baby helped me complete to read a book with a trans girl protagonist who is queer. And one of the spaces on Trans Book Bingo includes Love and Other Disasters, so I was able to complete that as well. Now on to the books. I filmed 8 videos this month, including about 4 vlogs, 3 of which were reading vlogs. So I'm just going to organize this wrap up by video. Starting with TBR Tackle episode 2. This is my new series, TBR Tackle, where I tackle 2 books off of my physical TBR in a fun way. Usually it's a theme. This month's theme was authors I've only read 1 book from. This was inspired by the Queer Lit Readathon prompt, One Time Author. For the video, I read Costumes for Time Travelers by A.R. Capetta and Freshwater by Kweke Emezi. Starting with Costumes for Time Travelers, this was adorable. It is a YA time travel book following Fawkes and Callisto, 2 trans people who I presume to be trans. Callisto's pronouns are they, them, and for Fawkes, his pronouns are he, him, and there is a scene in the book where he is being undressed because Callisto is going to make him a outfit, and he removes a chest binding. This is a queer normative world. I love that so much, but it talks about a fascist regime as we have time wardens. They are trying to eradicate the travelers, including Fawkes. Fawkes has been a time traveler since he was very young, and it's all he knows. When he turns up in Pocket, he meets Callisto and tells them they've met before. They have been lovers, but Callisto has no idea what he's talking about. They have always stuck in Pocket and in the costume shop creating costumes with their grandmother. When the Time Wardens come to Pocket, it is up to Callisto to find Fawkes and try to dismantle the Time Wardens and go back to stop time before it's too late. I really enjoyed this. The time travel elements took me a while, and this is the type of book where where I'm glad I sat on it a little bit, because in my vlog I wasn't too sure about it, but now the month is over and I've had time to reflect on it, I did really enjoy this. It is a light fantasy with time travel and a queer normative world, but it does talk about fascism. I really liked the fashion elements of this book. We talk about how fashion has evolved through time and culture. Since we're time traveling, we go to different eras, and it was really interesting to see how everything worked and how Callisto was able to help them blend into the worlds that they were visiting. I really enjoyed this, and I recommend it if you want a light fantasy with time travel and a queer normative world. Content warnings for minor violence and mention of a fascist regime. Then I read one of my favorite books of the month, Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi. This was fantastic. I was going to listen to the audiobook, but in case you missed it, there was a week of the month where my power went out for 4 hours. Oh, I wish it was 4 hours. It was 4 days, and I didn't have access to audiobooks, so I read this over a weekend and it was awesome. I feel like I don't have too much to say about it besides that. This is about a young girl, Ida, who experiences a traumatic event and starts to develop multiple personalities. One who is a god. This god is a horrible god. They just keep doing horrible things, and Ida starts to follow their orders and a lot of awful things start happening to them. This was just so beautifully written. It is Emezi's debut novel, which I still cannot get over. This was just phenomenal and quickly became one of my new favorite books. Content warnings for sexual content, sexual assault, eating disorder, blood, violence, medical content, self-harm on page, panic attack on page, and blood. Then I had my biggest video of the month where I read 3 books by popular queer authors. I read You Had Me at Happy Hour by Timothy Janofsky, Love and Other Disasters by Anita Kelly, and Detransition Baby by Tori Peters. Starting with You Had Me at Happy Hour, this was set in Allentown, PA, specifically Bethlehem. This is a small town workplace romance following Greg and Julian. Julian is the nephew of Martin, who runs Martin's Place. From the age of 10, Julian was raised by his Uncle Martin and his Aunt Augustine. Uncle Martin realizes that the place isn't doing that well, so he recruits Greg, a flirty TikTok mixologist who grew to fame. Greg says yes, and he moves from New York to this small town in PA to help, and he does a fabulous job. At first, Julian is not fond of Greg. Julian is a sommelier. I feel like I'm still saying that wrong, but he helps with the wine at the restaurant. He just feels like he's infiltrating and he's a hot shot, and he cannot bring himself to accept his new reality. But over the course of time, they start to develop feelings for each other and become friends with benefits. Now, I enjoyed this for the most part. I really enjoyed the mental health rep. Greg has anxiety and Julian has OCD. I love seeing male characters with anxiety, especially when they're conventionally attractive. As a trans man with anxiety, I love this representation and I thought it was spot on. He has multiple panic attacks, so warning for that. But overall, I was really happy that this was going in the direction I thought it would. We do talk about mental health and childhood trauma regarding alcohol. Both Greg and Julian are sober. Julian has more of a history with alcoholism in his family, as his mother suffers with alcoholism, and it led to him having a rough childhood. He talks about that a lot throughout this book, and that is my one complaint. I just hate when romance books look so sweet, but there is no content warning. It makes me so furious. I did read this at the beginning of the month, so I could be wrong, but I just wish these books had more content warnings, because somebody's going to go into a flirty romance like this with a cute cover thinking that it is just a spicy romance, because that is what it's being pitched as, but the blurb does not mention at all about it being heavy. This openly and graphically talks about alcoholism. There's a graphically detailed scene about drunk driving with a child in a car, and I just need that to be talked about more. I'm of the belief that every book, no matter the genre or audience, needs trigger warnings. I specifically would like them to be in romance, especially when we're in these instances where we talk about heavy topics and they are graphic. I can't remember if we specifically had a content warning note. I have a feeling we did, but I read so many books this month that I don't remember, so I could be wrong on this, but still, I just think the blurb could also mention this, that we have some exploration or mention about being sober. So we do have sobriety in this book, which I really love. I love seeing more adult romances talking about sobriety, especially in queer settings, because queer spaces do focus on alcohol a lot, so I liked the dynamic of two characters who work in the alcohol industry or with alcohol and they don't drink themselves. I think that is awesome to have, but we need to have content warnings still. For the most part, I enjoyed the writing and character work, but at times the writing started to become a little cheesy. As Greg is a TikTok influencer, there are times where the author uses TikTok as similes or metaphors, and that was weird to me because I just didn't think we needed that. That is just a minor critique that I had, but it made me think about how if an adult reading this book doesn't know anything about TikTok, they would think it's weird. Especially because the specific lines that were used just felt weird to me personally, as somebody who does use TikTok. I thought the influencer part was very well done. Sometimes when authors write social media into their books, it is inaccurate, but this was very accurate. There were a couple of moments where Greg is mentioning some paid content that he has to make and having to share deliverables, so that was very accurate, as well as answering comments and things like that. But one personal preference I have is I don't like to read overtly explicit sex scenes, and we do have that here. I'm happy for anybody that does enjoy that in their books, but personally I just don't. So if you do, this book is for you, but for me personally, I just felt like there was too much, and it does talk about kink as well. But overall, I enjoyed this, and you'll just have to watch the vlog to see if I pick this author up again. Content warnings for alcoholism, explicit sexual content, child abuse, minor brief mention, estranged parents, alcohol, minor panic attack on page, abandonment, and like I've already mentioned, there's a scene mentioning drunk driving with a child in the car. Then I read Love and Other Disasters by Anita Kelly. This is a romance between a cis woman and a non-binary person. They're on a cooking competition show called Chef Special. We're following London, who is the first non-binary contestant on Chef Special, and Dahlia, a messy queer who just got divorced and is hoping to prove herself on this show as a home cook. They could take home $100,000. For Dahlia, she wants the money to help her with finances from her divorce, and for London, they want to open a LGBTQI+ nonprofit. I really enjoy the elements of this show. I love to read books with reality TV or TV competition shows, especially when it involves food, because I am somebody that loves to watch those shows on Food Network. You could tell that Anita Kelly did their research because it felt like they were a producer at one point or had even been on a show like this because it felt so realistic. The only thing I thought was unrealistic is that they had their phones, and there's a scene where they break an NDA. So it had my literal brain thinking, how does that work in real life? But that's not something that I need to harp on because this is fictional. My only big critique with this book is we got more time with Dahlia than we did with London, and it felt like we had more trauma in London's story, and Dahlia was the character you were rooting for. I just wish we had more joy on London's side. Dahlia is just messy, and she is open and outgoing. I loved her personality, and she was one of my favorite characters. I loved her so much. I read the first 100 pages physically, and then when I got my power back on, I was able to listen to the audiobook. I really liked the audio. I think they did a great job with creating a voice for each character, because we are on a TV show and there are different characters who are young and old. I really loved Barbara. She was one of my favorite characters on the show. She was a delight. This is sort of a grumpy sunshine because London is very reserved, and I totally relate to that and understand why. But it took a while for the chemistry to get there because London was so reserved. And so it was harder for me to connect to them as a couple and root for the romance. But in the end, I enjoyed the romance. This did have explicit sexual content, but those scenes were written well enough that I didn't feel like it was overt like the last book I mentioned, so I was on board with this. I just love some messy queers and a good competition show, but I still wish we had more joy on London's side, and that's what's taking me out of my full enjoyment, because I loved the first half of this book. It was a quick read, I was loving it, and then I didn't love the second half when we talk about London's family dynamic and their estranged relationship with their dad after they came out. There is a happy ending, but I just didn't need that, honestly. Like I said, I just wish we had more joy for London, and that was my biggest gripe of this book. However, the transphobia is minimal. There's only one instance where we have transphobic comments, but there is a bigger conversation about London having an unaccepting parent. But overall, I enjoyed it. Content warnings for minor transphobia, misgendering, transphobic comments, unaccepting parent, anxiety, divorce, hate comments, explicit sexual content, alcohol, and there is a scene where the characters drink alcohol and get drunk. And last for that vlog, I read Detransition Baby by Tori Peters. I need to clearly air here because I felt like my thoughts didn't come across well in the vlog, so I hope that this part reaches the right people. I liked this. I didn't think it was bad at all. It was a very well written book. It was messy and it was very well done. So I don't want people to think that I absolutely hated this book, because I did enjoy it. Me and literary fiction just have that love-hate relationship. And I think this is the type of book that I might have to reread again to get the full points. And I need to do some research and watch some video discussions and author interviews. I need to dive deeper into this book because there's just so many elements that could have went over my head. But I still think this was so well done. It is so messy. I love my messy queers. I love the discussions about the trans community, especially the trans femme community, with an emphasis on white trans femmes. I loved the discussions. The social commentary is one of my favorite parts of literary fiction, especially when it centers queerness. So we have 3 characters: Reese, a trans woman, Katrina, a cis woman, and Ames, a detransitioned trans woman. It talks about heavy topics in the trans community, and as a trans man, I could relate to a lot of the content here. Being trans is fucking hard. It's not easy. It's an act of liberation and resilience, but I always say not everybody can come out. And through Ames's detransition story, we get a different side of the trans narrative that I loved, because I always say we don't need the cookie cutter experience of a trans person in stories. I'm so happy that this is popular and has won awards, and I totally understand why it's hyped, because it is just that good. But there are just some points where literary fiction and I just don't work. And I know you're probably like, Alex, then just stop reading literary fiction. But there are some that I found that I really enjoy. So I don't want people to think that I hated this, because I actually enjoyed it. I feel like my review came off as, oh, this book sucked, because it didn't. It was fucking great. I just was confused by some points, and I still think it's something that I need to reread it again to know what I actually feel. And it's the type of book that I need to just sit with my thoughts for maybe like a couple of months to fully grasp what I read and what I think of the book. So I hope you don't think I hated it, because I didn't. I thought it was good, and I will read more from the author. I honestly felt like the midpoint was the dip for me, and I did listen to it on audio, but obviously everybody's experience is going to be different, and like I said, I'm a trans man, so my experience with this book might be different to someone who is a trans woman or a trans femme, because I had a lot of comments on that video of trans femmes saying how much they love this book, and it makes me so happy because y'all deserve that. You deserve to have a book like this. It is so important that this book exists, and the fact that it is so prestigious, I'm so happy and I'm thrilled. But like I said, I still think there were some points where it was just too complex for me to be like, oh, this was great. But with literary fiction, I'm always looking for that aha moment, and it just doesn't come for me. I was waiting and waiting to find out why this was so beloved. And that's why I think I just need to sit with my thoughts and look up some discussions about the book, because I might have missed something. But again, the discussions were so good about grieving the life that you thought you had set out for yourself as a trans person. It is so relatable in that sense, especially as these characters are, I think they're in their 30s or like approaching that point. So again, I did not hate this book. I thought it was very well done, but it wasn't my favorite. That's what I was trying to explain, is I was looking for a moment to be like, yes, this is my favorite book. When I read Freshwater and I was like, this is fantastic. Even just from the first chapter. I truly think it's literary fiction that I don't mesh well with sometimes, but I have found some hidden gems. The plot of this book is following these three people as they navigate a pregnancy. Katrina gets pregnant from Ames, and Ames was on estrogen for many years and thought that was impossible, but turns out it's not. So the whole book, they're trying to figure out what will happen. Reese has always wanted to be a mother, and so Ames proposes that they come together and raise this baby together. But there are so many conversations here. I really enjoyed the end. I liked the end result. It was really powerful, and I enjoyed it. I didn't hate it at all. I know I've said that a bunch, but I just want to get my point across. Content warnings for physical abuse, transphobia, F-slur, T-slur on page, infidelity, mention of a miscarriage, pregnancy, divorce, racism, explicit sex scenes, alcohol, outing, brief mention of drug use and eating disorder, suicide attempt, violence, and mention of death and murder trans women. And my last vlog of the month was my annual Queer Lit Readathon vlog. I filmed myself reading for the last week of June, and I was able to complete 3 books. I wanted to complete the last row of the bingo board, so I did just that. I started with the manga Confessions of a Shy Baker Volume 2. This is following 2 gay men, Gon and Tashi, in Japan. They are a gay couple. They've been together for many years, but are not out. Gon is so sweet and chill. I love him so much. But Tashi is very reserved and anxious. He does not want people to know that he's gay. But there are so many instances where people just keep bringing it up, and he is trying to mask to make sure he doesn't get found out. So this whole volume is him exploring that and trying to pass as straight. I just feel for him so much. I can't wait to see how the rest of this series goes and how Tashi will develop as a character and become more comfortable in coming out if that's what he chooses to do, because not everybody has to come out. Tashi works at a real estate agency for his full-time job, but he loves to bake. So every chapter is a different dessert as he makes Gon a low-calorie dessert every Wednesday. Gon has been told due to health issues to cut down on sugar, so Tashi, in an act of love, he wants to help him. So he makes different treats. Each chapter has the different treat along with a recipe. I love that so much. I love seeing him bake and getting the recipes because we do have this book set in Asia, so it's different food, and I really like to see what he makes each time. It's really fun. This does talk about calories and weight loss, so if that's sensitive to you, I don't suggest to pick this up. Content warnings for mention of calorie deficit and weight loss, outdated transphobic language, and anxiety. Then I read Forget Me Not by Alison Derrick. This was for Buzzword and the Choose Your Own prompt for the Queer Lit Readathon. This was fantastic. I read it in under 7 hours on audiobook thanks to Libro FM. I bought it with one of my credits that I had. In Alison Derrick's debut novel, we follow two closeted lesbians, Nora and Stevie. They have a plan to get out of conservative PA and move to California to be themselves and live together. They're all set to go, but Stevie experiences a bad fall and gets amnesia. This means 2 years of her life is erased and she has to piece her life back together. She feels like she's 15, but in reality, she's 18. She's so confused to why Stevie's even there. Oh my god, this broke me in a million pieces, but it is so good and I'm so glad I finally read it. YA just hits like this. It is so good. I can't even express my admiration for this book. It was just fantastic. I loved every single minute of it. It was amazing. I loved the love story of Nora being so patient with Stevie, but there's times where she's frustrated and she doesn't know what to do. Oh my god, I can start crying just thinking about it. It was fantastic. I highly recommend it. Content warnings for physical abuse on page, disownment, homophobia, religious bigotry, queerphobia, head injury, medical content, racial microaggressions, conservative Christian messaging, toxic friendship, manipulation, and underage drinking. And the last book I read in that vlog was Glitch Girl by Rainey Odit. The publisher sent me a review copy. Of course, all of my thoughts are honest and I'm not being paid. I was just sent a copy. Written in verse, set in the early 2000s, we follow Jay, a middle school student who has ADHD. They were recently diagnosed with it and are obsessed with this game, Coaster Boss. If you, like me, were obsessed with Roller Coaster Tycoon, this. That's exactly what this book replicates. But Jay was kicked out of their old school for being disruptive and their behavioral issues, so they're starting fresh at a new school. But their parents are not treating them well. They feel lost, they're being bullied, and she doesn't have anybody on her side. She just keeps telling herself, this is my brain. I can't control my brain. And through playing Coaster Boss, she is able to navigate her diagnosis as well as gender identity. But this really shows how horrible adults can be to neurodivergent children. We see Jay feeling so bad about herself. They are constantly told that they are bad from their peers, from their family, and teachers. So Jay just feels horrible about themselves because she is doing the best she can under the circumstances she was given, but is not given a direction to navigate ADHD. She's navigating it all on her own and being ridiculed for things that she can't control. This was so well done. I really enjoyed it. I will say though, it did feel a little bit long. I don't know if it was just that I was trying to wrap it up at the end of the month, but I wouldn't recommend to try and read this all in one sitting because it's a lot. It is filled with dark topics, but what I love is the author added a content warning at the beginning of the book. Would you look at that? It's almost like we could do that in any book. It says, this book contains depiction of difficult subjects that some readers may find triggering. These include trauma, physical abuse, emotional abuse, violence, self-harm, misgendering, transphobia, homophobia, and bullying. It's just that easy. The author mentions in her author's note that this book pulls from her own lived experiences in childhood, hence why it is set around the early 2000s. Jay is pretty much at rock bottom and feeling horrible about themselves, but when they meet Sam, another non-binary kid, things start to look up. I do wish this had a little bit more joy because the end does have it and it has a happy ending, but whenever I have a book where somebody is writing from their own lived experiences but does still mention it's fictional, I wish we could add a little bit more joy in there. I know that Coaster Boss gives Jay so much joy, so I do love that, and hyperfixating over things like black holes and of course Coaster Boss was really nice to see, but I just wish there was a little bit more joy. That's my only critique because I really enjoyed this. And the final book I read was not for content, but it was to wrap up the Queer Lit Readathon bingo board. For banned book, I read And Tango Makes Three by Peter Purnell, Justin Richardson, with illustrations by Henry Cole. I read it on Libby and I had the read aloud feature. The book was narrated by Neil Patrick Harris and it was such a cool experience.
And an ice rink to skate on in the winter. Best of all, it has its very own zoo. Every day, families of all kinds go to visit the animals that live there.
This book is precious. This is a nonfiction picture book about two male penguins at the Central Park Zoo who are given a penguin egg to take care of, and they form a little family. But this is one of the most banned and challenged books in America. If you read this and you thought there was something wrong with it, you're the problem. I'll just read you some statistics. A 2018 Banned Books Week article says the ninth entry in the American Library Association's 2017 Top 10 Challenged and Banned Books list is Old Hat at Censorship, and Tango Makes Three has appeared on a list a whopping 8 times in 2017, 2014, 2012, 2010, 2009, 2008, 2007, and 2006 for challenges that mostly distill down to the book's depiction of a same-sex relationship between penguins, unsuited to age group, anti-family, and the head-scratching accusation of being anti-ethnic have also popped up in challenges. PBS.org states, published in 2005, the book has been consistently challenged for years. Challenges have included complaints that the story is unsuitable for young children and has homosexual overtones. Others have said the book is based on one of the subjects that is best discovered by students in another time or another place. Some parents have also requested the book be placed in a section for alternative or non-traditional families. Do with that what you will, because I can't even get into this right now, okay? It just infuriates me to no end. I hate book banners. I hate them so much. And if you also hate them, I suggest that you go over to my friend Rachel's channel if you haven't already. She does amazing work. And I also made a reading vlog last year where I read some banned books, so I'll link everything down below. I don't know how anybody could have a problem with this because it was so sweet and cute. I know it says it came out in 2005, and at the beginning I shared my stats and I mentioned a 2015 title. My title was 2015 according to Libby, so that's just what I used. And now the time you've all been waiting for, my Queer Lit Readathon bingo results. I got 3 bingos, and here are all the prompts that I completed. Outside, short and sweet, alliteration, 1990s, one-time author, manga, banned book, small town queers, choose your own prompt. I chose API author, 2025 release, borrowed and continued. I want to make a little note about the prompt 1990s because while I was reading Costumes for Time Travelers, they go to 1999, so it counts. I was trying so hard to fit this prompt, and I was so happy when they went to 1999. And those are all the books I read in June. Thanks so much for clicking on this video and spending some time with me. If you enjoyed it, give it a like and leave a comment. It helps me out a ton. You can just leave a rainbow emoji. Thank you to my top patrons for their support this month. I really appreciate it. If you would like exclusive content every month, feel free to become a paperback pal. It helps support me as a small trans creator, and I would love to have you a part of our community. If you would like to watch more, I will link my past vlog here, and you can subscribe there. Bye.